welcome everybody on very unique meeting of Agile Labs community. Today I'm honored to welcome Jon Kern, the person who was there during the creation of Agile Manifesto, something which is a basic stuff which made all of us meeting in here and and working in Agile world. So very unique opportunity, and I'm very happy. And Jon, thank you very much that you dedicated your time to meet with us. Let's start hearing, and there will be also opportunity for all you folks to ask questions and discuss. So please take this opportunity and let's rock and roll.
Thank you, Pavel. Thank you, Marcin. Appreciate you reaching out and giving me the opportunity. So yeah, I want to give a little bit of kind of my perspective of what I think are some core foundational pieces to doing Agile and being Agile and doing software development using some of these techniques. And I want it to be conversational. So I'll cover off a handful of slides and just try to give a little bit of taste of what I'm talking about regarding the foundations, how I do development, things that I think are important to learn and understand and try. But I wanted to not just give you 50 slides and just pound you with, a gush of information that you might not have asked for. So I want to leave plenty of time for valuable, what I think more valuable for you, hopefully, question and answering. And so we can dig into some things that you're facing, problems that you have, and talk about them from, as you can tell, the Agile Manifesto was over 20 years ago. It wasn't like I was 10 when I was there. So I have a fair amount of experience. So jot down questions, or if there's something that you want to call out right away, that's fine too. But please make this what you need it to be. And normally I don't put a slide like this out there, but lately I have, when folks might not understand the kinds of journeys you can have. Like, it might seem odd how I got here from being an aerospace engineer, only having two probably laughably silly courses in computers and programming. Because, as an aerospace engineer, did a little bit of electrical, a little bit of computer, a little bit of everything. But I saw the power as I was doing research and development, cruise missile engine testing. I saw people do stuff, and I was like, what's that? That was cool, because you gave me something I needed as an engineer, and they said, oh, it's software. So I kind of tripped into it, fell into it, nothing planned, and ended up working on some pretty exotic, like a real-time man-in-the-loop, 50-foot arms, centrifuge-based flight simulator software for the F-14. I'm sure most of you have probably seen Top Gun, or at least know about it, when Goose died in the first movie because he was in a flat spin. Well, that was legit. That was real. So I would take people up through the flat spin, and you probably remember as a kid, like a ball on the end of a string. That's what the pilot is like. 23-foot long string, 6 times the force of gravity. We called it eyeballs out. So if they didn't have their harness locked, they'd be smashed into really brutal. So that's kind of my kind of software. It was, as I said, real time, really amazing. And I built an engineering company, started working with Peter Code. We ended up creating TogetherSoft. So I have a really crazy world of creating some companies, writing software, learning at the feet of Peter Code in terms of object-oriented modeling. Was invited and able to be part of the Agile Manifesto gathering. So all that to say, you might be surprised where your career can go. And I feel blessed to have had all kinds of amazing opportunities to, as I like to say, put smiles on the faces of clients and users. That's really the kind of the name of the game. And right now, I have had since 2006 a production firefighter app. So this is a firefighter shirt because I asked them for, I'm not a firefighter. I play one on TV. But I do production work every week. Like I deployed something the other day. So I keep myself humbled, and I still struggle with Agile and doing things right. And sometimes, okay, write the test, write a failing test. So anyway, all this to say, I am not some pristine academic, out of the loop person. I live and breathe and work with teams all the time. And right now I'm working with adaptivist.com and work with teams around the world. So as I mentioned, 20 plus years ago was The Gathering. It sounds like a movie name. It was a pretty amazing event where we were able to essentially bring our lightweight methodologies. Because back then, some of you, I can't see people's faces, but might be too young to even know, there was such a day when Agile didn't exist and heavyweight methodologies ruled the day. Rational unified process was a big one. Like SAFe reminds me a little bit of that, very well documented, highly, a lot of research, a lot of wonderful information embedded in a methodology. And I was doing military work, and there was even a specification for it. So back then we were trying to combat kind of the marketing juggernaut that was heavyweight process. And many of us that were invited had lighter weight methods. It was originally called the lightweight methodologies, which of course, lightweight's not a good adjective for most anything except vehicles that need to go fast, but certainly not, you don't want to be known as a lightweight person. The cool thing about it is one of my mantras that I work with the teams is, be humble. And I like to joke even when you know you're right. And the cool thing about the Manifesto gathering was I always like to say we left our egos at the door. So I wasn't a famous person in the room. There was, Uncle Bob. I had magazines in my barn that I, C++ report and things like that I remember he wrote articles or was the editor or something like that. So there are definitely people there, the XP folks, Kent Beck, that, I have books from them. So nonetheless, the real key was we met truly to understand each other's perspectives. What was it about each of our methods? Kind of a bunch of folks that are good at object modeling, makes sense that we came up with the gist of what might be valuable for producing work without so much heavyweight process. And I want to point out that the top of the preamble is very humble, and so is like the bottom part. The we are uncovering, that's an active verb, right? It's not we have done it, it's we figured it all out, but it's very humble in even how we express that. Hey, here's some things that we uncovered while we were meeting, and I'm still figuring it out anyway, by doing it and helping others do it. That's still true to this day for me, and I still struggle. It's very real. It's, I think, the hardest sort of methodology, if you could call it that, to participate in. And the individuals and interactions, that's, I think, one of the biggest things I want to hammer home today is that very first value, I think, is the key to it all. And we'll talk more about that. But the elements in between are very pragmatic, very much around when I was working with Peter Code, when we created TogetherSoft, from his basement to like 400 people. I had a dozen or so consultants like me that we would go out and work with teams and companies and help them, build software. And one of our our mantras was frequent, working, tangible results, AKA working software, frequently, over comprehensive documentation. And that's, still standing today. The elements around, when I was doing Defense Department work, I learned quickly, the contract's all good and well, but it's much better to develop a rapport with your customer and try to do the best thing for all of us, for both of us, versus having to get into discussions about the contract, right? So it's super valuable to understand, once again, there's individuals interactions, i.e. working with the customer, not against them. And then it was very common to, especially in the Defense Department world, a year-long contract. Who can predict, especially in research and development, right? It wasn't like I was doing work in manufacturing or producing something that we've already done. This wasn't purposely unknowable, like it was R&D, research and development. You do something, you learn, and you take the next step. So how could you possibly predict a year of that? Anyway, we had to, because that was the system that we did, government work with. So there was another great opportunity for me, at least, to emphasize that's just kind of silly to stick to something you thought of a year ago and not change in the face of overwhelming evidence. So being able to adapt and that's kind of the that's being humble. That's, you'll see I have some other mantras around reducing the time. So there's so much here that I wanted to make sure we emphasize, just from my having a lot of experience working with a heavyweight system. So these are really key things, I think, to refocus on and look at again. And the humility expressed by the this over that. I'm a nut about process and tools. Like, about the third time I'm finding myself doing the same thing, I want to automate it. And I often want to fix it in process, not with heroics. And I love using tools to break down mediocre, tedious tasks, right? Just automate the darn thing. So I'm a nut about that, but it's way more important to have folks actually working and talking together, because they'll create their own process. They'll even create their own tools. So that's the ability to say this over that. You need to dial it in for your context. It's not a one size fits all. So the folks that are hammering others, in terms of like the Agile police or the Scrum police, the context really matters, and you need to have conversations. It's not really cookie cutter. And I won't go into these, but maybe you have some questions about some of the principles behind the manifesto. These were added afterwards. But what I want to kind of leave you with in terms of a simple way to think of Agile is, I call it mind the gap. It's a little bit of a play on words for the gap between a platform and a train, or a ship and the dock, that kind of thing. But I think of it as the gap in time between doing something and getting feedback. Because if you build a product and then nobody wants it, that's a big, huge gap of time and a very expensive way to find out the feedback is nobody wanted it. So most of what we do could be boiled down into caring deeply about shortening the gap. Like the mantra we had, frequent, tangible, working results. The word frequent is in there. Tangible is actual software. And for decades, I've mentioned people, process, and tools in that order. But the order, it's very nonlinear. That people are so much more important, that we build a culture that supports the people being able to interact and work together, and then process and tools support that. And I've since added things around the Agile mindset, understanding a little bit about how the way we make meaning is super important. And those are some other aspects that we bring into our practice. I think of it a little bit like a missing piece to my practice early on, to understand there's things we can learn about helping build this kind of holistic world in which, I like to call it a team sport. Or I also like to joke, software would be easy if it weren't for all the people. But unfortunately, there are people there. So this might be my engineering background, I'm not sure, but considering being able to wiggle on one part of the system, how does it affect another? That's a very important part of my practice, and taking steps to understand, even if we want to change process, well, try it, see what happens. You want to change part of the system, try it, see what happens, do a little bit, because they are connected. But sadly, we often turn into disconnected silos. We get rid of actual connections in terms of human connections, and I'll cover more about that. But I think that's really part of maybe all of the problem. From a technical perspective, if we were to work together, and if anybody has wants to do this for real, nothing I love better than helping a team who has maybe a large new feature they want to build, or a new product. It's a great way to learn these simple, what I would think fairly simple techniques. But the vision is something that I try to keep in front of the team all the time. The where are we going? What's our goal? What's the destination look like? What outcomes are we seeking? Because that helps us make judgments, and it helps everyone make judgments around the next thing they're thinking of doing. Is it bringing us closer to that vision, or making us go further away? And that helps reduce the need for lots of command and control. If everybody's on board, we keep understanding where it is we're heading, we can have good, robust conversation. As we gather the requirements, and this is an actual board in a team room that for a major paint manufacturer that we were working with. And as the subject matter experts would bring in a new card, it looks like I ran out of white cards and I stuck a yellow one up there. We would write down what they're interested in, or they would write it down, stick it on the board in whatever priority they wanted. And off to the right of this board, it was the actual Kanban board when we popped something off the stack and put it into the dev team. But this was us building up the information. And as we learned about the requirements, we're doing what I would say is just enough domain modeling. And I'm kind of a nut about the business, the problem domain, ruling the day, because that's where you make your customers happy. That's where you make your money, is at the problem domain, not the software domain. The solution space is just a means to an end. So I want the subject matter experts, the business experts, I want to use their language throughout, not only the classes, tables, elements in the software, elements in the user requirements, the acceptance test, the behavior-driven development. That's so important, because that helps eliminate, what's already a difficult thing in communicating. If we use different, well, I said we, thinking I'm the development side, use different terms than the business, that's just constantly leads to friction. And then just enough architecture, just enough to take the next step. Even if the product champion says, oh, we're going to have a million users a second. Okay, yeah, I'll get right on that. I will instead build something that's easy, flexible, get something working. Don't spend excess amounts of time building more than you need. It's part of the balancing act that we as engineers always do. It's finding a sweet spot. It's balancing all these competing elements, so that you see this just enough strewn about this page, because it's so important to not do more than is necessary at that point in time, because you can always go get more information, but you can never get more time. That time's gone. You just either wasted it or spent it effectively. So this is again about humility and doing less than you think you need. The consistency aspect is so important. When I built and designed with my team, the IBM manufacturing execution system was 200 or 300 problem domain classes. So you'd see, quite a few pages of diagrams like that for each major. It's like 7 major elements, like work, WIP, bill of material, products, all kinds of things in a big, huge. It drove all of their factories that built their computers. Just Just put it out there. I was 10 years shoved into 3 years. You know, it was high stress, but super valuable. But that was built with a super consistent framework. I didn't have something smart like Rails at the time, but the architecture I designed was very Rails-like, very much model-driven architecture, so that it didn't matter what part of the app you're in. Everything, all the boilerplate needs to be the same. We make our money on putting features out there, and we don't want to lose money on inconsistent architecture. So that kind of thing is super important to me. The UI design, everything. It's not like we want a lot of creativity across the app. Make it all, make it really consistent, and then always be shipping is super important. I need to be able to press a button to deploy. I need to be able to make sure that we can see things running. We need to be able to share it with our clients, with our customers, with our beta customers, right? Again, that's individuals and interactions. It's getting things out there frequently. So this is my sort of, tricks of the trade, or whatever the phrase might be, the foundation that I use. And it's not just for a whole new product. It can be a feature. It can be an epic, anything like that. So for me, that seems simple, but I understand it's also not easy. And that's sometimes lost, that just because it's simple doesn't mean it's easy. And when we take those fuzzy ideas that someone might be bringing to us and try to break them down, when they're fuzzy, we're still trying to understand it. I like to hold on to the big ideas, take pieces off as we can, but I don't just demand that we turn this complex thing into complicated units that we can. That's a little too egotistical. I'm comfortable having some things not quite known, and that's okay, because they can often act as a driving force, and there's something out there. But for us to make any kind of commitments, we need to turn stuff into actions and doable things, and that's how we break it down into epics, features. I use story maps. I use BDD. I'll even do pseudo BDD in the Jira issue, just to help make it more tangible. And then as we move it into the engineering world, not by that point, the acceptance criteria, everything else is really crisp and clean. And oftentimes that BDD gets translated into actual BDD, behavior-driven development, like Cucumber, things like that. Again, that's like sort of the outside behavior that I want. And then of course, TDD and test-driven development and unit tests inside at the code level, and being able to get that out the door and deployed. And I'm kind of a nut about monitoring. So in the beginning of the big ideas, I'm like, what outcomes are you expecting? And then in the end, I'm testing those outcomes. So there's a closed loop. Again, that's sort of an engineering feedback bit in me, but I'll even build like API calls that developers can put into the code to say, this is the kind of data that we want to track in our business intelligence, to say, is this feature being used? That sort of thing. So it's a closed loop system, and it helps. I think it also helps explain when you have more confidence in being able to make commitments. That was part of my training in DoD. It was kind of a joke to think that we could do plus or minus 5% estimates on year-long work that was research. That's just stupid. So I gave up caring about it. Just win the business and build a rapport with the customer. So I'm a very non-estimating kind of person unless I have to. I don't do story points. I don't do estimations. So see me later if you wonder about that.
It's good we are recording.
Yes.
Good to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm happy to explain that later if someone wants to ask, and it could be you, Pavel. I'll explain what I mean, because it's part of this holistic, crazy world that I live in, that I think other people can live in there too. And I like to say, be lazy, sneak up in the answer, and that's part of. You'd be shocked at how small I can make something, to just give a little bit of a taste of it, even though I might have even worked with a beta customer saying we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and might have done some balsamic mock-ups and have agreement on this thing. But the first bit that I produce is it's almost laughably simple. And then of course they'll ask for the other things they saw in the mock-ups, or they'll ask for something we probably actually might already have started. But the point is, that's okay. You don't need to be worried about not having enough, especially if you've built a good rapport with that customer. So be lazy, sneak up on the answers, and is another way that I like to, the mindset is so important. You don't know as much as you think you do, so stop acting like it. And even if you do, so what? Be happily surprised that you were right. I mean, so like I can argue both sides still do things super small, take small steps, because then they're small errors. And another way to put it, like that other cone of uncertainty graph about fuzzy to concrete. This is another way. This is something I put together for an immersive workshop that I used to go to different companies and deliver these sorts of things, is how to take those product ideas and the different things we might need to do. And some of them, more detailed than others. Sometimes the architecture is super boring because it's yet another web app. We're just going to use the same old that we always do. But nonetheless, this is just another way to think about it. The different roles, some folks want to know where did the different Scrum roles go and things like that. But all along the way, we're constantly collaborating and interacting and working with more than just silos. And that is so important, because when we have things like compliance, maybe some other, operations or finance, somebody else has some sort of real legitimate reason that we need to have, aspects of our solution comply with certain regulations or things like that. Well, if you ignore those because you're just working in your little engineering world, well, that ain't agile, and then that's missing. Non-functional requirements are just as important, and understanding those ahead of time might even be more important, because you might find you can bake into your design, your world, some of that compliance. So having these other groups also being aware of agile concepts and even lean, I think is really important, because I've worked in consulted with the company who their joke was they would bring a dump truck full of projects at the beginning of the year, dump 100 projects onto the dev team, and they were asking, "Hey John, can you come and train 50 teams?" Yeah, no. Number one, I don't do training. And number two, 50 teams, what are you, crazy? Like, how about 8? I think we negotiated down to 8. And the reason I say I don't do training is because that's some kind of simplified world that's always going to work. How about the world you live in? Let's work there. I'm not saying, I might do a little bit of training on some simple app for BDD, or, how to break a story down. But you know what? Let's just find part of your world. I like to view myself as a mentor, or from American football, a quarterback, not a coach, because a coach is on the sideline. Coach doesn't get a bloody nose or doesn't get dirty, right? But a quarterback does, and a mentor is sitting with you. So that's why I say I don't do training. And that's something I've done from 20, 30 years ago, is mentoring and working. We might do a little bit to explain object model concepts or who knows what, but then we're quickly into your world, dealing with what you have to do, trying to find ways to give your team a little more elbow room or a little more space to then do better. So that's why, I think it's so important to involve other folks, so that they don't come expecting the engineering to solve all the world's problems by certainly if you coded twice as fast, we'd be better. Because what happens is those same organizations who go slow want to somehow scale, and they think that they can take what they're doing, even though it's going slow. And I would consider it premature scaling. And that can certainly lead to more failing and more expense. Because unless you have something like a good cross-functional team that's really collaborating, working, and having lots of conversations and caring deeply about making the customer happy, or if you've got, let's say, competing, some larger organizations have main products, like the one that I was working in, that had 3 main products, maybe 3.5 or 4, and you have to coordinate. And so if you have good folks that coordinate, now you can scale something like that. But what I often say is we mistake cooperation for collaborating. And when you have silos, when you have teams that do all the UX or all the business analysts or any kind of silo like that, you might be cooperating, but that's not necessarily, as effective as collaborating. Or you've got, you've broken the system down into APIs. We have back end and front end, which always drives me crazy. I never understood why. And I'd like to learn why someday. But, even if you have API teams, if you let them coordinate just their own work, that's, local optimization. That's not, how do I get piece of value through there? Well, you got to wait because this group is doing somebody else, so that's cooperation. It's not collaborating. Sometimes it's plain as the nose on my face is that their architecture is holding them back. They did not upgrade their architecture as their business morphed, and you can see it sometimes a mile away or 2 kilometers away. And other telltale signs, like this one group that wanted 50 teams trained, they would just go buy another team in India, so to speak, another $1 million, another team. And believe me, twice as many teams weren't going twice as fast. So that is a problem. And I like to think of it as a silo trap. I don't know how we do it other than it's easier to be in a silo because you don't have to talk to people except your own people. So maybe it's just human nature that it's uncomfortable to get out of your silo. But the angle that I like to take with teams is to celebrate the victory, which is putting value in the hands of our users, getting them to smile, getting wonderful feedback from the users. I'm always bringing that back to the team. Anything that's positive, especially, because that's what you want to reward, not building your own little silos and thinking your own little world is efficient. You want to make the value delivery to be the most awesome part. And one way to do that is as simple as how those fuzzy ideas, as we move them through the system, we're working with a handful of cross-functional folks, the business development, QA, UX. I started bringing QA into the fold back in, I think, maybe in the 2000s, like 2000, maybe early 2001. Actually taking what was a siloed QA group, this was in Russia, bringing them over to, we're going to build this team here. I want some UX people, I want some technical documentation people, and I want QA. And it was much, even though it was, the company that Peter Code and I and some other, with the company we founded, it did, I never pulled the card about being a senior person in the business. They fought me tooth and nail about that, but it was the best thing I ever did. So 20 some years ago, I learned the value of bringing QA into the mix and not having it as a separate, almost adversarial function, because doing this sort of collaboration helps you get the most bang for the buck, as we would say here, the most value, because we can even explain to the business, hey, that little thing that you asked for there, that's really expensive, but I can do 80% of that for this small price. Oh, really? Yeah, I didn't know what I was at. I didn't realize that. That's fine. So many companies don't have that. They're just order takers and they just don't collaborate. They don't try to reduce scope to save on cost, so to speak. And all this has to live inside of what we call a deliberately developmental environment, where if you try something new and it fails and you get your head chopped off, guess what? You're not going to get a lot of innovation at that company, right? So you need to be able to celebrate, almost, maybe even over a little exaggerated, depending on the current culture, to make it okay to learn. Some people would say, well, yeah, we don't call it failure, we call it learning. Yeah, the whole point is, if you have a humble perspective, if you understand a lot of what we do is a hypothesis, like even building something, even a feature, it's a hypothesis. We expect this outcome, we might not get it. So what's the cheapest way we can figure that out? So it's really important to build this kind of an environment to encourage learning, to help support innovation. because we're not just making bricks, right? It's you can't, as Ron Jeffries would say, whip the ponies harder. That's not a good strategy. So for me, it's about learning how to be agile, learning these kind of simple but not easy things to do. And maybe to start, you might fall into the pattern of, here's a Scrum recipe, I'm going to do it. And that's okay. You have to learn somewhere, just like in cooking. But if you're still doing the same thing years later and you haven't tried to explore different ways and learn the impacts of some of the choices that the teams make, that's you should try to let go a little bit and learn how to be more agile, try different things. And it starts with me and you, I would say, right? It's not for management to say, because this happens a lot, all right, you all go be agile. And meanwhile, the business is not agile. That one company I was talking about, 50 teams, one of the teams we were working with, we did a little bit of a value stream. Lo and behold, 8 months of effort up front to decide to do 8 weeks worth of work. And they wanted this 8 weeks of work to go faster. I'm like, yeah, here's your problem. You take this huge waterfall approach from the business. Why don't we tackle that? So at any rate, looking forward to any kind of Q&A you might have.
Thank you, Jon. I can hear myself, but anyway, guys, it is opportunity to ask questions, and we have the first one. So from my side, only if it's not an issue, if you speak, it would be good to see the face. So to the camera on, if possible.
Yeah, thanks, Pavel. We also have like 2 questions from Antonina. So Antonina, do you want to ask it in person or you want me to read it? I can start reading. So Antonina has a question. If you know how to contact the owners of the Agile Manifesto org website, because there is idea of a new translation into Polish so that it would be better, or
Yeah, send me an email about that. Yeah, and I can probably find Ward, or I forget if he's still running it or if he's given it up. But every once in a while I get an email from Ward. So Ward, he's the guy who invented the wiki. And as we finished the manifesto, the 4 values, there's almost an afterthought. Hey, do you think we should publish it? And Ward said, yeah, sure. I'll set up a website. Yeah, whatever. Might as well. Like, nobody thought that all this would happen. So, it was long managed by him, and I'll double check. But yeah, send me an email. I'd be happy to.
Okay, I will connect you together. Okay, Ola.
Hi, hello. Yes, I'm Ola, and I have a maybe difficult question. Maybe it will be easy for you. So from your experience, why usually Agile fail in the organizations?
Maybe because it's not Agile. I don't know that's part of the problem is details would be important. I often say when I'm working with teams, when someone says Agile, something pops up above my head like a cartoon, the idea bubble, the thought bubble. And it's important to talk long enough to understand our bubbles are the same. So what kinds of do you have examples of what kinds of things were done that were quote unquote Agile? Because I could guess, but if you have some examples, that would be even better.
So I wanted to ask about your experience rather than the example. I know that's the process. I know that
Okay.
If it's not Agile, it can fail. Just I'm looking for a tip. What things I should avoid to not fail the Agile in the organization? So maybe that help you to answer.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. For me, it's really getting back to some fundamentals. So probably the thing that happens the most is a false sense of, because we're following these steps, Scrum, for example, or SAFe, something that's very prescriptive. Certainly we should succeed because we're doing all the things. It's just like, have you ever made a recipe and it didn't turn out well? I mean, there's sometimes, especially baking especially is more chemistry. Like other kinds of cooking, you can be a little more freestyle. So I think a lot of times it has to do with the failure of people communicating enough in a wide enough context to actually have an impact. So it can happen where one part of the organization is trying to do some agile things, but they're blocked, so to speak, by other parts that they bump into that don't understand at all what you're trying to do. So at most you have pockets of success, but overall, well, we tried agile and it didn't work. Well, no, you really didn't. It was fake agile or agile in name only. So I think the biggest thing is really maybe revisiting even these values, as I said, and thinking about how do we do things like this part? Are we very good at this level of sort of humility and doing things at a small, like the key, the reason I say agile is hard is because you have to step back. You have to try to take a deeper perspective and ask questions about, like, when you consider something a failure, well, why? What happened? Why, if was it a failure because we didn't know this was the goal? Or was it a failure because we were too egotistical, we weren't humble enough, we thought this was gonna, if you do not reflect, if you do not step back and ask yourselves, why did this happen? And you don't learn, that's a key to continued failure, not learning. I don't know.
Thank you very much. Can I have a very quick one more, or do you want me to wait? Okay, I was always curious. What was the main trigger for all of you to meet in Utah and start conversation about the change of the approach?
Oh yeah, great question. I think Uncle Bob had the first inkling of back in the day. I never went to one where there were these pattern. There were these meetings where they talk about patterns, like software architecture patterns. I want to say Portland, I forget. Plop is coming to mind, but anyway, there's these weird meetings with a handful of people that talked about geeky things. And I think Alistair also was thinking along the same lines, and somehow they connected and then expanded it to other like-minded, who else in our industry is doing lightweight methodologies, who else, might we want to invite? And, so I think it was just a happenstance that two people wanted something similar, and then it turned into a fun gathering of people with similar attitudes about smaller, lightweight processes. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Antonina, I guess you can do it now.
Yes, hi. I don't know if, oh yes, finally you can see me. Sorry, I had some pretty serious technical issues. We have a question. I mean, because I'm a member, I would say, of a group of people who are translating, trying to propose a new, better translation of Agile Manifesto. And we have two questions that we'd like to ask you, Jon. So our first question would be regarding principles behind the Agile Manifesto. Who are the business people for you?
Oh, typically they would be, if I'm, let's say, product that we were building for an insurance company, I often would call them also subject matter experts. So they could have been the underwriters, they could be the insurance agents, they could be the CEO of the company. For that one picture here with the just enough requirements, that was in a paint manufacturer, big worldwide paint company. And they're the subject matter experts were like PhD, color specialists. And, so sometimes business, I might also equally say subject matter experts. So the people that have the need, the knowledge, of the customer, of the world that you live in. So that's who I mean.
Okay, so these maybe also people inside from your organization, right? Not representing stakeholders from the outside, but also.
Yes. Yeah. Almost. I would say almost exclusively internal people is the way I typically think of them is someone from the company has decided we want to build this product. Okay, so let's talk it through. So that's one kind, when it's like the paint manufacturer or the insurance agency or IBM. There the business was. I went to the large server division where they made $1 million computers, and I went to PC company where they made laptops and fast. And there that was more of going to the different organizations that we needed to support. And then sometimes, of course, the customers are can also potentially play that role depending on your business. But I might not call them the business, I might call them customers.
Okay, thank you.
Good question. I'd have to look at the rest of the bullets to see where does that word show up.
Yeah, actually we have another one because in the first sentence that is not on your slide, there is a sentence saying we follow these principles, right? And it's missing here. But on the web page there is such a sentence, and it says we follow the principles. So we have a question about the second bullet, starting with welcome. Yes, the next one is deliver, and there is business people, and the next one is build. So should we read the whole text as we follow, so we welcome changing requirements, we deliver working software? Is it like saying about what you do, about your practices? Or maybe we should read it separately and understand it as welcome, deliver, and build, and so on, as an advice to someone.
That's a funny. It's an interesting thought to sort of wordsmith, because I'm kind of a grammar police myself. Because it is, we welcome changing requirements. Yeah, that's true, and we deliver working software frequently. The frequent tangible working results. Now, of course, business people and developers must work together. That stands. That's okay. We build projects around motivated individuals. Yeah, I mean, it can also be thought of as commands, like you should welcome, you should deliver, you should build, right? And some things are just that's actually funny. I never my word police might go crazy on this, but
that the problem is that in Polish there is no possibility of having those dual meaning. We have to go for one solution, because otherwise it makes no sense.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, I'm happy you can continue the conversation afterwards. Hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm happy to help. Yeah. Because that's a fascinating challenge given the language differences. And that's very interesting, but funny, but also I can see why it's a very valuable thing to try to get right, so to speak.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Pavel, you have your hand up.
Yeah, before me was somebody else, I guess.
Wojciech, if you can unmute and you can see you. That's great.
I have one question, because previously on Agile Labs we got a webinar about the metrics, and I would like to ask you about your favorite metrics, the one that you are measured maybe almost always or always?
And do you mean any particular type of metrics, like software development type? Is that what you're talking about?
Because if we focus on that, the software is primary metrics for progress and success, but sometimes we need some more details, some numbers for board members or anything. So do you have your favorite set of numbers?
Yeah, certainly my biggest one is features, right? The outcomes that we expect to deliver because we're building features. So one of my early on with Peter Coe, feature-driven development was an approach, and the definition of a feature was client valued, like some client valued feature. So value and client was built into the definition of things that we put on the board to build. I have since realized not everybody thinks that way, and therefore have instead said that in a roadmap view, it's like I'll do simple roadmaps and a wiki, just like, hey, what are some big things we want to build? And much like that board that I showed with index cards on it, that was kind of a roadmap. But here, what I would do is I would say, if we build this, I'm expecting to, like, one was, can you help register our specifying engineers to the pump portal? Oh, okay, yeah. So that feature, the expected outcomes is registering. Simple. It's just a number. I expect to get people registered now. So I always want outcomes. I want people to be able to judge the merit of what are we going to spend our money on and what do we expect to happen if we build it, because that's where it starts, and that's where the business needs to have a say and a stake into why we even chose to do this. And then that closed loop aspect is, all right, well, what am I going to measure along the way, right? So I can map things from the roadmap onto something that's finally gotten to the top of the stack. We move it into the engineering team, and I forget if I have anything here that shows that there's other ways where I can measure and show progress, which is because we're building features along the way. So the primary measure of progress should be outcomes produced and value returned from it. That's kind of my first point. Other things that you could play with in the context of, if we promise we're delivering value, like that's the first and only thing, and we're measuring it, that's the most important thing. And you'd be shocked at how, like, I build dashboards to show the outcomes that we expect and what we're actually receiving. So there's no hiding, because we need to understand, is it working and why isn't it working? Did we get value out of this? Is it happening or not? But then from a fun sort of, if you want to be engineering nerd, you can be a nut about, like, the Jira control chart is a great one. For example, you can kind of show, is our process getting better over time or worse over time? Or, what is our cycle time? How quickly? Because ideally it's single piece flow. I pick up an issue and I get it out the door. Sprints or a batch? Why are you doing batch? Batch is bad. Why does anybody do a sprint? I don't know. Right. So you can have fun with trying to actually measure stuff as a software team. Like, you need to not use it to whip the team, right? You don't want to beat them over the head with it. But if you're, this is what I would do. These are my teams, and we would laugh at our, I'm just looking at what some of these, yeah. We would laugh at our sprint burn downs, because we didn't care about sprints. So the metrics, the only metrics that you should care about is some value delivered to the customer. Everything else is a proxy, right? I mean, we could get better as a team, but so what? What if we're still producing crap? What if we're producing unvaluable software? Woo, but we're really efficient at it, so who cares? We're still going to go out of business, right? So don't let the business people asking these questions escape without doing their part to say, well, hopefully we're doing, this is my way of working, is what we're working on right now better at least be the right thing. I mean, as simple as that is, we better be working on the next right thing. That's as best as I can do. Because trying to predict the future, it's just a fool's errand. Anyway, I don't know if that answers your question.
Great. Yeah, this is fine. Thanks. That is an awesome answer. Thanks.
So probably I am next. I need to ask about the topic which was already in the meeting, because you mentioned that you don't use story points, and it is one of my favorite topics. So I would like to hear a little bit more about it. Thanks.
Yeah, so it really, oh, here's some other things. I'll send you all these slides too, with all these weird backup slides. So yeah, here it is. There's the metric. Sorry, little delay in the, it's a delay across the Atlantic. Yeah, I couldn't hear you. Yeah, so it all boils down to when I'm essentially taking this thing, breaking stuff down, or this. This is the wider view where, I don't know if you have the candy called Pez, P-E-Z. It's like a stack of candy that has a spring and pops. It's like a fight. It's first in, first out. Anyway, it's a stack. A lot of what I always say to software is a to-do list. It's got to do 6 things. You got to do 6 things. What's the fastest way to do them? I don't know, one at a time, maybe. So you can see here is the reason I don't estimate unless I have to, is we should just be constantly working towards the value that the business sees that they need, the things the customers need the most, whatever that happens to be. Here it's you can see it progressing on the left-hand side, progressing up the board, getting more. It's interesting because as time goes on, oh yeah, I remember this too. Though the subject matter expert might wander in, and we'll stick a new sticky, along each horizontal line is like an epic, so to speak. We'll stick a new feature there or something like that. But then once we actually start to really be about ready to do it, you can see we're doing UX design. So it turns out that for me, the energy spent is, or I should say, my energy, the team's energy is better spent understanding the stories, breaking them down, trying to turn them into very similar sized elements, because I can be really predictable if I got a bunch of small stories going through the system. If we do 10 a week and there's 40 on the board, you can see the board on the right there with a bunch of stuff in progress. And those 2 circles, those are magnets with people's faces on them. So we paired, so usually a QA and a developer. But the reason I get away with quote unquote not estimating is because I take that energy and I attack the feature just in time or as late as possible. I attack the feature to turn it into 5 things: story splitting, BDD, I have probably a shot of a story map. So the whole point is to, like, the value behind saying something's a 1 and a 3 and a 21, and people are just guessing. They might be right, but it's, to me, I find it's still just a guess, and I still need to break the stories down. So why do it? Why not break the stories down, use the number of stories as your metric, your estimate? So now to that's why if you're just constantly working and you're constantly building the product, just work that way. Why do this ceremony all the time? Just breaks the stories down. Learn how to do that. Your life will be much better. Now, when there was an estimate required, like I said, I will do estimates when I have to, but I won't do them just all the time because it says so in Scrum or some such. I don't even know if it says in Scrum. I have no idea. But a customer, we were doing very good development. She was the head of for Grundfos, a huge pump manufacturer. She was kind of our main contact. And Stephanie said, "Hey, I'd really love to be able to get new specifying engineers to sign up and learn about our stuff and get on your portal. And can you add something to allow people to sign up?" "Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's easy." "Okay, well, can you do it for this trade show?" "Oh, well, when's the trade show?" January 27th or something like that." "Oh, well, it's like early December." "Okay." Now you're talking, right? That's a real deadline with somebody else's date. They're not going to wait. They're not going to care that we missed the deadline and shipped a week later. So like now it's serious time. Now we really need to. I said, "Well, let me get back to you." And I went back, talked to the team, explain what it is we need to do. And the core feature that needs to work is someone needs to be able, like we all do this all the time on web apps, right? I do it with one hand tied behind your back. Nonetheless, we need to be able to have someone sign up, become a user, get their email, get it verified, yada, 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 all that typical stuff that I've done many times. But nonetheless, ask the team, "Do you think we can do it?" And I said, plus do it like a week ahead of time. And knowing that we've got Christmas and New Year's in the middle, right? It's not like we have all the time in the world. So when I got the yes from the team, then so there we estimated, we figured out the basic things we needed to do. Does it look like something we can do in this amount of time? Yes, it does. Cool. I'll tell the customer. And so we committed, and we couldn't be late. So once we do that, then I'm a real, I don't know a bad word to say, but now don't get in our way, because that's the only thing we're going to do. Don't bother me. Don't ask for anything else. We're going to make sure we meet this deadline, because now I estimated and I'm going to make it. There is no, like I said, this was a huge trade show, with all the pump manufacturers in the world. They're not going to care that we didn't make a deadline. Only our customer will be upset. So that's when I estimate. That's a real need. The rest of it, it's just probably not as necessary as you might think. So
Okay, thank you. Axe.
I think I'm the next one. First of all, I wanted to thank you for something you said in the beginning, when you said that you are still exploring the meaning of Agile, of this mindset, of this concept, because especially today when there is a lot of voices about that Agile is outdated concept. I think that is really important to hear this from someone who created it, that you are still trying to understand what Agile mindset and Agile approach is. So thank you for that. And my question is, do you still believe that the most effective and efficient method of communicating information is face-to-face?
That's a good question. A nice T-shirt. Way to play to the audience. I mean, play to the speaker. Yeah, that's awesome. I don't think I have one. Yeah.
I can send you one.
Yeah. So that's a really good question, because Ron Jeffries and I would often sort of spar a little bit on that, because of the years that I worked with a team in St. Petersburg, Russia. So I was remote half the time. It certainly engendered and really drove home a little bit more of the fundamentals, right? So it's really even more important that we understand the vision, that we have a good grasp of the requirements, that we have a shared language, the domain model, so that we're communicating as crisply as possible. So in some sense, you might be able to be more sloppy being in the room, because you know, we're all talking and we all know it until the new person comes, and then the new person is like, how do I get onboarded? Well, you just have to be with us long enough. Like, yeah, screw that, right? That's what I say. I'm also a nut about documentation, even though it says, you know, prefer working software over giant river rafts of documentation. Documentation is good for onboarding. So in some sense, the being remote puts me into a different mode of working, where now I have to be a little more purposeful about communicating some things like the domain model, like the requirement. You know, you can't get away with I overheard something. Now I will say, being in person, if possible, is certainly beneficial, but I still practice this way even being in person. And it's, you know, just that luckily someone could pull up a chair and we can go over a model, or we can look at stuff. So I'm kind of, as you can see, arguing both sides. I mean, it's great to be together, but at the same time, if you know you're apart, you might actually value those times that you do. Like, I would go there 2 weeks a month. So that's pretty frequent in person. But I think the idea is to understand the importance of at least having, like, Zoom is like back then we didn't have Zoom. You know, there was nothing. Email and Jira, like, although it probably wasn't Jira, it was whatever we used before that. Right, so you can have asynchronous comments through the issues. And the Russian team started later in the morning, so we had at least a few more hours of overlap, because they're probably one time zone past you all, if I'm not mistaken. So it was like, you know, 3 p.m. in Russia was 7 a.m. here. So we did a few things to help improve some asynchronous collaboration, and then to allow synchronous collaboration. But I think it's just important to understand when to have meaningful Zooms, you know, and then how to connect with some artifacts. But yeah, that's a cool question, and it's a fun one to explore as a team. How can we do better? Because we kicked ass being, you know, semi-remote. Yeah.
Thank you, and I'm happy with the ending, because I didn't thought that your explanation will go this way, but yeah, I totally think that we do not have to work in the same room to create a bond as a team, but it's really important to bond together and to have these connections, and sometimes, or maybe not sometimes, but have our cameras on, see our expressions, not only hear our voices. So thank you for your response.
And whenever possible, like if money was no object, I would kick off a team with being in person, because drinking some beers, or in Russia, you know, I had to learn how to, you know, I normally didn't do shots. I had to learn how to do shots of vodka. That, you know, that sort of even bonding and eating breakfast, or, you know, then serves you better 6 months from now when there's some tension, or, you know, you remember, oh, you're human too, right? We're all humans, and yeah, so it's the more that you can at least try to meet some people, it's super valuable.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think I'm next. So
Yep.
It's a pleasure to meet you, Jon, and I would like to thank Marcin and Pavel for having this opportunity to meet you in person and to ask the question. So my question would be about the scaling. So I wonder, what was your best, let's say, agile experience on a scale? What do you feel was the main ingredients that you felt like, yay, it really works on a scale? And if one of those ingredients, it's any framework, scaling framework that we already know. And I'm asking that question because sometimes I have a feeling like people and organization focus mostly on let's say installing specific framework that should guarantee the success instead of evolutionary change or whatsoever. Like you wouldn't put scaling frameworks over anything else, right? On the Agile Manifesto probably. So that would be my long question to you.
Yeah, it sounds like what we would call a loaded question. And boy, all you folks speak such good English. Holy cow. It makes me glad that well, anyway, bravo on your language skills. I think the one program, like let me ask you this. If I told you that this manufacturing execution system for IBM, it was C++, 2 different databases, 3 different user interfaces, thin client, and I would say 200 to 300 problem domain classes. So like I said, there were 7 major components that made up an MES system. A typical MES system always has, like I was saying, bill of material, product item, all these things that are well known for manufacturing. And this allows them this is for discrete manufacturing. So 3 million lines of code. Does that sound like a large project? Like 200 to 300 problem domain. That's domain classes. That's the literal business classes, the business model for each chunk, right? So all the other classes, like all the boilerplate and the UI, right? That's a whole nother world. That is where I gain what I would say my experience about scaling. Like that, as an example, I remember they wanted to bring on a handful of developers at a little bit too early. Like we were still doing a bit of the modeling, kind of getting just enough information up front to make sure we had things, trying out some different architectures, getting the consistent pattern of how we're going to do. And I said, look, you can bring 20 developers, but I'm just going to sit them in that room. They're not going to do anything yet. I'm not ready. So once we had some of these foundational points, ready to go, and we got things rolling, then I began. I think at most we might have had 30 people on the team, but somewhere between 20 and 30. And I often wonder if in a large behemoth organization that wouldn't have been 100 people or 120 people, some giant thing, because it could have been. But so my defense is what I'm showing here. It's really if you do, I think, a good enough job, because the killers are dependencies, and if you let dependencies run wild, good luck. And dependencies in architecture or dependencies in your organization because you built these silos. Right now you're in this big room and you're putting yarn across all these dependencies, well, that's your problem. So how do you avoid that? You do, I call it like interface, design by interface. So maybe as an engineer, I learned, systems are a bunch of subsystems that have interfaces with each other, and the minimum needed, not excessive interfaces. And so my approach is to avoid the need to scale, so to speak, in the traditional sense, to avoid the need to have some framework tell me how to prescriptively scale, because I'm going to instead approach it this way. I'm going to, at most do some high level meta architecture that might then understand these major components and the interfaces between them, and keep it to what I would call a dull roar, or the bare minimum. And that's the real key. What I think happens is the architecture gets messy, you get technical debt, and then pretty soon you get these silos forming, and people create API teams, and the API teams they're optimizing their work and not optimizing the whole. It just turns into this large mess that I think could have been avoided with better work up front, and even recognizing now with the TogetherSoft desktop model, we redesigned it about every 18 months, you know, where it's like, oof, because especially as you're growing it and you learn new things, you know what, I'm not going to try to refactor this. I'm just going to keep this thing going and then leapfrog it with another team and build the next version. You know, and a lot of that doesn't happen in big organizations that end up either thinking they need to maintain the existing source code and not leapfrog it. So my goal would be to avoid the problem, because here's my hypothesis. Let's say you have the problem, you have silos, you have tons of dependencies, you bring in something like SAFe, and now you can expose the dependencies. You have this big room planning. I don't know why it took SAFe for y'all to get in a room and talk to each other, but right? I mean, did you need SAFe to say, hey, you know what? It's a really good idea if all you people actually get off your butts and talk. You might be able to realize certain problems that you're also anyway. But let's pretend, you know. So one of my hypotheses is, does SAFe actually enable dependencies? Like a enable drug addiction, you know, enable my addiction to, you know, to coffee. Does it actually, because it makes them, you know, makes it easy to have, look, now we have these dependencies and we can deal with it. Cool, let's just keep adding more dependencies because we can deal with it. Versus, what if we used it as a temporary measure to help gain control because you couldn't figure it out any other way? So I'm going to charge you a lot of money because you couldn't figure it out. I'm going to use this prescriptive process. What if you could gain control of it and then get rid of that prescriptive process and get back to doing it how I say you should do it? Anyway, those are just some thoughts I have. I don't know if that answered your question, but I prefer to avoid problems rather than solve them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense totally. Thank you very much.
Okay, John, if you still have some time, because we already took a bit of it, I have some questions from the community that from the people that who weren't able to be here today, or they are not asking it. So should I continue, or you want to?
Go ahead.
All right. So how have your views on Agile methodologies evolved since the creation of the Agile Manifesto? Is there anything that you thought about differently back then and now? And maybe if there would be anything that you would add or maybe change, what would it be?
There's a few questions in there.
Yeah, but I guess, I mean, you mentioned a few of these things during your presentation today, but yeah, I wonder what would you should.
Yeah, so my typical answer, I'll start with the last one. Would I change anything? And my answer is always no. Like, tell me what's wrong with these 4 values, so to speak, right? I think, and this is with a great amount of humility, are the United States of America, our what we call our founding fathers, the documents they created, like the Declaration of Independence and sort of the Constitution. I feel in a very humble way that they got at the gist of sort of human governments and things like that, and it stands the test of time. And I think we got at the gist, or the fundamental aspect of building software and working, with people as a team. And I think it's so fundamental that I don't see any reason to say that, yeah, you know what, contracts, they really should come first. Like, yeah, no, so that's why I wouldn't change anything of the values. Principles, you might be able to tweak. Certainly not just grammar. Some you might be able to tweak. There were some arguments about some, the context behind different lengths of time, and a few things I might change in the principles, but those aren't. I don't care as much about those per se as these values. These are, I think, these are the ones that I go by all the time. And so was the first question about, are there things that have changed in my practice?
Yeah. Or how do they evolve and since the creation?
Yeah. So the beauty is, like, some things are so easy today that were harder back then. Like when I was talking about the manufacturing execution project, C++, we're all in a room. I think it ran on an AS400 also, and in addition to our computers. It was not, you had to build things. You had to build deployment, right? I had to ask, hey, sysadmin friends of mine, can you make a button that even I can push to deploy, right? So a lot of the concepts that, and this is 95 to 98, so this predates any of this, or DevOps, right? Just like pulling QA in with the engineering team, that predates all of this. But that sort of thing today, the ability to have, we ran scripts that would run tests, and we did all kinds of things by hand. I had a wiki of sorts, but it really wasn't a wiki. It was just some piece of crap shared network drive where I tried to make things visible and onboard. Metrics, all kinds of things that were built in not only to the tools that we use, but that we would be able to run metrics on the system. So today, the things that have changed is there is absolutely no excuse not to be doing things technically very well, right? Today, you almost have to work hard to not do automated it blows my mind how I'm trying not to say things too harshly. Put it this way, if I'm working with you and we're going to build something, we're going to be doing behavior-driven development, we're going to be doing test-driven development, we're going to be pairing testers with developers, we're going to have the DevOps engine, the CI/CD, we're going to be able to deploy all that stuff right from the get-go. So that, I think that's the biggest thing, is it's so easy to practice this, like the things like working software. And it's just so easy. Now, and Zoom, like I often would joke that you could be working in because we were at one point at TogetherSoft, we had a building down in North Carolina that had 2 floors. And I would often joke, the second floor might as well be in Russia. Because it's like, it's just as much energy apparently to get up off of your butt to fly to Russia as it is to walk up a flight of stairs and go talk to somebody. I would say that sort of jokingly, but not. So today, I would also argue that the technology makes it super easy to have interactions, even if you're, like we are, thousands of miles apart. There's no excuse not to talk to people. Slack isn't talking. You need Slack, but you don't need the tool Slack. You know what I mean? Like Slack is really good, but it's also really bad. So yeah, I think today there's so much available to allow you to actually embrace this and live it, even if you're remote, not remote, whatever the case.
Okay, I think that's it from my side. So I think we can wrap it up unless someone else has a question. Piotr, be my guest.
Yeah, I hope you can hear me, but I'm curious what you, Jon, think about those quite recent movements, like for example Agile 2, with the criticism about Agile Manifesto these days. Are you familiar with that and have some opinion?
No, can you tell me some of them?
Well, like for example, you can jump to the principles behind Manifesto on your slide. And one of the criticism is about working software as a primary measure of progress. I tried to find it on your list. There should be something like that.
Yep.
Yeah. So for example, this is like one of the criticism points, that it's just like a, output working software, and you should focus on outcome, and that it's not a measure of progress, like that sort of thing. If you're not familiar, maybe it's pointless to spend time on the discussion, but I was curious about what do you think about those forces that started to emerge over the last few years?
Yeah, well, if somebody is picking apart that sentence, okay. Yeah, you think we meant delivering crappy non-value software? You know, I think what's missing is back in the day of waterfall, people would spend 9 months doing use cases. Giant, right? So what we were trying to promote, of course, is, yeah, no, you got to build some software. Like, stop it with all of this. We're going to do requirements, and then we're going to do all the design, and then someone's finally going to implement it. Then someone will test it, and then finally we'll put it in production, right? That whole. So this is maybe lost on the young people who didn't realize there was a different way of working. So yeah, it should be working software delivering measurable value to the customer is the primary measure of progress, which is, as you could tell, everything I said during this talk. And when asked about things like that, it's all about value, delivering value add versus non-value add.
Yeah, I agree with what you are saying. And from my perspective, it's in the very first principle, what you actually pointed out, extra.
Yeah.
I was curious what you, in general, if you are familiar with those movements and criticism overall. It's quite funny to read if you have time, because it's more than, you know, one page like with original Agile Manifesto. It's like shorter book to read. But if you don't familiar,
hit me up. Hit me up in LinkedIn and send me a message in LinkedIn with what it is, and I'll be happy to record a video.
That would be great. Thanks.
Yeah, I won't hold back. Yeah, because it's like, come on. I like your point. I love that you pointed out, look, the first bullet is about value. So please don't assume the working software bullet is not about value. Yeah. And that's in some sense, that's what's wrong with, maybe if you are brand new to Agile and you don't understand enough of the nuances about delivering software and value, what that even means, you might make try to think of it that critically and make a mistake, like thinking that means the wrong thing. But that would be the folly of treating it as if it's a set of steps and as something crisp and completely documented. That's kind of the whole point of mine, is individuals and interactions over everything else.
Sure, thanks. Actually, if I can stall 1 more minute.
Sure.
As you mentioned waterfall, I'm curious because I'm definitely not remember the times of, like a pure hardcore waterfall. I'm too young for that, fortunately, hopefully. But actually, I have some like a reflection that even the original paper from Winston Royce about waterfall is hugely misunderstood. But maybe you can also shed some light on that. Maybe you remember by the book Waterfall Dawn.
I do. I'm actually looking, because I remember his son, Walker Royce Jr., asked me to review and proof his book. And again, I'm an aerospace engineer, not a software engineer. So the first time I read the actual, I think it was published in IEEE, I read the waterfall paper by his dad, and I was like, wait, it has feedback loops in it. What the heck? I remember that. Like, that's not what I was told. It's a lot like rational unified process. Like, I could map my lightweight process to RUP because I read the book and it said you can tailor it. Oh, cool. I'll tailor it to my world. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The waterfall was misconstrued they just did it the easy way. And it was, you know, it was from construction or something. I don't know. It was from the, as if you could break things down. And that's the problem. When you're dealing with something complex, you can't just turn it into the complicated units. You know, pieces of it you can, but the whole reason it's complex is because it's unknowable. You know, you can't treat it like that. So waterfall is, in some sense, falsely treating something complex as if it was just complicated. And the other thing I like to joke is I use waterfall all the time. It just only lasts maybe a day or two, right? I mean, it's for a given feature, I might do a little bit of each a little step, but it's, you know, it's not 9 months of use cases, which is a risk because that's a big gap in time before you find out if those are even right or valuable. So, but yeah, the funny thing about the waterfall paper was it actually had eddy currents, so to speak, like eddies in the water. You know, you see the reverse flow. So yeah, good point.
Yeah, thanks. Great talk, by the way.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any more questions? Okay, guys, because so Jon, thank you very much for even longer time with us. It was fantastic conversation, and it was a huge pleasure to listen to you and sharing all these aspects. So thank you very much for your time, and to everybody, because you stayed with us till the end. We have a special surprise and premiere. So right now I will start sharing for a moment. Because right now, and Jon was also so great to look at it and review. Right now you will be able to download Agile Manifesto as a notebook, illustrated notebook. So yeah, we will share the link and enjoy this. And enjoy the Agile Manifesto and make use of it. So this is, do I'm sharing? Yes, I'm sharing. Okay.
Yep.
So this is something we would like to share with you. And I think we can put the link in this questions and answers room because there is no chat, unfortunately. So let me do it.
I did it just now. So
Okay.
I hope everyone can see it.
Okay, so it seems this way or another, we came to the end, and really once again, Jon, thank you for all these thoughts, sharing with us. Actually, it would be, you know, great to to stay longer. So thank you very much, and it was really a pleasure to hear you and speak to you, and thank you for all the answers.
Yeah, my pleasure. And if folks want to invite me back, I'm happy to come anytime you like or have any discussions or, yeah, I'm good. It's always fun. I learn a lot by hearing the types of questions that people have. So thank you. Appreciate it.
So have a nice day later on, and guys, have a nice evening. And that's it.
All right. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you, guys.
Thank
for
you so
organizing
much.
it.
Bye
Yeah.
bye.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.